Welcome to the WriterDojo with your host, Steve Diamond.
To infinity and beyond.
And Larry Correia.
Dude, I was gonna use the same quote.
Sucker!
Today's episode, Writing Hard Sci-Fi with Les Johnson.
We always try to do a movie quote at the beginning of the episode that corresponds with... Yeah, I'm dead serious. That was the same one I had. All right.
I'm all in on infinity. This is great.
Okay.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the WriterDojo. Glad to have y'all with us today. Today we have a special guest. One of our good buddies decided to slum it and come visit us here in over in Utah. So we were like, you know what? We should probably have this guy on because he's way smarter than us. And that's good. So we have our buddy, Les Johnson, on. Good to have you with us, man. Thanks for coming by.
Oh, I'm glad to do it. It's great to be here. I was in the area. It's my first real trip to Utah of any duration, and it's good to be here.
We were talking before we came on that you decided to come right when the air quality was at its worst. So congratulations.
Well, the decision wasn't up to me. I was out here for a space conference that was being held in Logan, the small satellite conference.
Oh, okay, cool.
And so it was all about space, and we were geeking out all week, and it's been scheduled for a year. So, it just worked out that way.
Yeah, that's so Utah State University is where I went to school. And I got my degree there, and for those of you that don't know, it has a really well-respected aerospace engineering program. They do a lot of projects with NASA, a lot of really interesting things, and actually that's where my son is going to college in engineering. So
looks like a good school, and they're actually flying things in space, which is not very common. It's getting more common than it used to be, but it's a great thing to be into.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yep.
So we've known Les for a lot of years.
You've known Les for a long time. Yep. I actually met Les for the first time at LibertyCon 2 years ago. And because, I'd seen you online. We'd done a little bit of back and forth here and there, been in the same groups and stuff. And then, finally got to meet you. But yeah, you've known Les for a while, though.
Yeah. And Les is one of the writers I've known for quite a few years because you've been writing for Baen books for quite a long time.
Oh, yeah, for over a decade.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back, gosh, the first book was around 2010, 12, somewhere in there. I'd actually have to go look. I don't remember.
Which book is that one?
Well, it was a book I wrote with Travis Taylor called Back to the Moon. It was a near-term science fiction adventure before we actually decided to return to the moon, which we're doing now. And it was a lot of fun. It was Travis's, one of his early books, and it was my first foray into science fiction.
Yeah.
Was a collaboration with him.
And you've done many since.
I have. I've collaborated with some folks. I've edited some anthologies. I've written a few solo novels, and it's been quite a ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
Also nonfiction. You have a very successful nonfiction book.
Well, I do. That's how actually I got started writing. I'd be in the late 2000s. In my day job, I work at NASA, and I meet all kinds of interesting technical people. And a good friend of mine named Dr. Greg Matloff had written this great book called The Starflight Handbook, and it was basically an introduction to deep space beyond the solar system travel. And he came to Huntsville to work with me for the summer, and we started talking about we need to become a civilization that lives off the asteroids and other planets and not rely on bringing everything from Earth. So he said, well, why don't we write a book? And so we wrote a book proposal, sent it off to Springer, a popular science press, and they bought it. And so we wrote that book. It was pretty successful. And as we were doing that book, they sent us a letter saying, hey, there's this Italian guy who wants to write a book about solar sails, which I happened to be working on in my day job at the time. And we're unsure about his ability to write a book in English. Would you work with him and co-author with him? So that off came the next nonfiction book. And that book did very, very well. It was reviewed in the journal Nature and had second printing. So that was my beginning was in nonfiction, popular science nonfiction.
Yeah, so you're kind of slumming it down here in the sci-fi fantasy ghetto with us.
Oh, no. I'm a science fiction fan from way back. That's what motivated me to study science and go to work for NASA.
Yeah, and so in your day job, you are a legitimate rocket scientist when we talk about big brain stuff here. Well,
I acknowledge that, but I don't like to wear that moniker all the time. But yeah, that's right. And I have to give a caveat that my writing is not endorsed by my employer. So I do that on my own time. And so anything I say is just me. It's me. It's not NASA. But anyway, sure. I got to get that out there.
Okay. So for the listeners out there, the science nerds, all of those who want to know kind of the background, can Can you give a kind of a brief overview of some of the really cool sciencey stuff that you've worked on that is not classified that you can't talk about?
Well, the good thing is most of what NASA does, we do talk about. We're the civilian space agency. The classified stuff's usually on the DoD side. Now we collaborate with them occasionally, but most everything I do is wide open. Oh wow, I've had a good ride. I was at NASA for over 30 years. For those that can't see, I'm follically challenged, so but, the hair fell out, but I'm there.
It looks normal to me.
Wow, I'm a physicist by education. Came from East Kentucky, always wanted to work for NASA, and I started right out in the project office and began working on a technology called a tether, a space tether. So if you can imagine unrolling a wire that's 12 miles long in Earth orbit and having it circle the Earth. Basically, it works the same way as the alternator in your car or a generator, which is how we generate electricity, wire moving through a magnetic field. And the Earth's got a magnetic field, so this wire's flying around through the magnetic field, generates a voltage, and you can generate power with that. And you can also get propulsion. So my first flight experiment that was scheduled, well, we worked on it in the late 90s through the early 2000s, was how to move things around in space without rockets, because that was what I call propellantless propulsion. I kind of look at rockets as so 20th century. Man, we're in the 21st century. We need to use the energy in space and do this to move around. And so I was successful at that and worked in our advanced concepts office, which is way cool, by the way. We're on the front end of a bunch of new projects that I was involved with. And then I started working solar sails and other advanced in-space propulsion, because my real goal is to take us not just to the planets, but set the stage for us to become an interstellar species someday. And I have to tell you, you're talking about hard science fiction. I'm doing this job because I read Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, Isaac Asimov, Ben Bova. All those folks really inspired me.
That's
and
incredible.
That's why I do what I do, is because of those people. Yeah,
but those guys inspired you to actually do it. And
oh, yeah.
And you're doing it.
And guys,
I'm trying to do it. Yeah,
I've heard some discussions over the years. I've just been the dumb kid hanging out in the background where you've been having some discussions with some different people at different events. Just fascinating stuff. The solar sail stuff, the laser energized hyperspeed solar sails.
Well, we want to do that. I mean, what the first step is to learn how to sail in space just using reflected sunlight. If that's for those that don't know, a solar sail looks like a sail on a sailing ship, only it looks like aluminum foil, but it's much lighter weight, and it moves through space by reflecting sunlight. So again, no fuel. Yeah. And the nice thing about that is the spacecraft that's flying around on sunlight can keep accelerating and maneuvering and never have to worry about a propellant budget, which is huge. Yeah. And we've flown a couple of these. We've got another one that's going to fly. Planetary Society flew some in Earth orbit. But what I want to do, and what I write about in my latest nonfiction book that you mentioned, Larry, the Traveler's Guide to the Stars, one of the options for going to the stars, in my opinion, I didn't come up with this, but I've been advocating for it, is you build these big sails and you get these big lasers like the military is building. And you basically, when you get away from the sun and the sunlight gets dim, you keep accelerating by shining these big lasers on them. And I've done the math. We're not there yet with the laser power and the materials, but if the trends continue, I can see us launching our first interstellar spacecraft within 50 to 75 years using a laser-driven light sail. Jeez. So I'm excited. I came from this conference talking to the young people there who don't know what can't be done, which is what I love about talking to young engineers and scientists, because they'll figure out how to do it. I challenge them, when I retire, I want you to pick up this capability and take it to that next level. So that's kind of what I'm about in a nutshell right there. And I'm trying to inspire that next generation. And that partly is why I write science fiction, because it was such an inspiration for me. A lot of these young people may not pick up a pop science book, but they might pick up a science fiction book. And if I can get them excited, that's good.
Well, like you mentioned Ben Bova, Dr. Ben Bova, and you finished up one of Ben Bova's series after he passed away.
I am. I just finished that and submitted it to Tor Books. It completes his Grand Tour series, which he began with his big novel Mars, and then started writing about all the other planets. And after Ben passed during COVID, Bova, Kova, here we go. I was contacted by friends, his publicist, and then his widow, asking me if I would consider finishing his unfinished book and wrapping up the Grand Tour series with the book Pluto. how could I say no?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
How could I
there's no
say
way.
no? But I was in a panic because although I had written with Ben before, we wrote a book together back in 2014 for Baen called Rescue Mode. It had been a while. So I had to reread his book, How to Write Science Fiction. And I had to reread my favorite book of Ben's, which was his Mars novel, because I wanted his voice. I wanted to get, I don't know that I can mimic it. I wasn't really trying to mimic it, but I wanted to honor it, as it were, when I'm writing the book. I didn't want it to be a radical departure in style. But that took some effort. I had to do some homework. But the book's finished, and it's with the editors. So I'm excited. It'll come out sometime in 2025.
That's super cool. For those of you who aren't familiar, Ben Bova, absolute legend in the field. Like for 50 years.
At least. He edited Analog. He edited a great magazine called Omni for a while. His Kinsman books were basically the young space cadet officer in the Star Force or whatever it was called at the time. And that really motivated me in high school. And to get to write and finish his book, he was like he was the leading figure of the post-Heinlein Asimov era, right? After they were gone or almost gone, Ben was kind of the guy at that era, and just a real inspiration.
So I think maybe I've shared this story on the show before, and I kind of want to get kind of a take of yours on this lesson. So back in 2013, back when I still went to Worldcon, when I was young and stupid and still thought it was awesome, I ended up on a
We've all
panel.
been there.
Yeah, I ended up on a panel. Poor me, the accountant, who doesn't understand science in the slightest. I ended up on this panel with these guys maybe you've heard of. One was named Joe Haldeman.
Oh,
One was named Norman Spinrad. And then another guy was Greg Benford.
wow. Okay.
And it was all talking about hard science fiction. And then there was me.
Yeah,
No, I was the moderator, which was the only smart decision.
that was a lot of mental horsepower on that.
Yeah,
on
I
that
mean, they were
table,
up there,
so-
and they're introducing themselves, and they were talking about all the 9,000 degrees they each had, and all this stuff, and they all just at one point they all turn at me after they've introduced themselves, and then and Joe Haldeman says, "So, what do you do?" I'm like, "I'm the dumb guy." So, as we were talking, we got to a certain point, and they were just going on and on and on, and the reason this came up is because when you were talking about like solar sails and stuff like that, the way you were describing it, for me anyway, I was kind of getting it in my own rudimentary way. When these three gentlemen at the beginning of this panel, when they were explaining things, they were saying all these big words that I had no idea what they were talking about.
Well, neither did the audience. I'm assuming.
No one in the audience. Well, I'm sure there were probably a few people in the audience.
Yeah.
And there were hundreds. This was kind of a marquee panel because it was three of the biggest names in science fiction ever, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And I kind of stopped him and I said, "Okay, look, it's obvious that you guys are way smarter than I am, and that's great. I'm totally fine being the dumb guy." I said, "But how do you take all of that you've just said? How do you make it digestible for the audience that you're writing for?" And so that's my question to you. How are you taking some of these really big concepts, these really cool ideas and things that you're obviously super excited about? How are you making them digestible for the dumb guy like me that's reading your book?
Well, first off, I don't believe for a minute that either of you are dumb guys, but I'll
When
take
it comes
that
to
for
science, I'm dumb.
I'll take that for what it is. I am of the opinion that if I can't explain it in the simplest possible terms to someone who does not have a science background, then I don't really understand it. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of colleagues and people I've met through the years that are incapable of doing that. And at my inner self, when I hear people can't describe it at the simplest possible physics way, I don't think they really understand what they're doing. They're just doing the math and bluffing their way through. Huh. Okay? And I've learned that to get funded in NASA or anywhere in a technical field, you're often briefing your ideas to people who have not done any calculus or math for 30 years of their career, and they're in management, and they're great managers, but they're so far removed from the technical that you have to take it to that level. And I'm not questioning their intelligence, it's just they haven't done it in a long time to get funded. And this is the dirty little secret of Les's success getting proposals funded, okay? And that is, in my day job, I may not have the best idea. I am not the sharpest stick in the stack, but I'm probably one of the best communicators in the bunch. And so I'll be in a competition for funding on a project, and this relates to my writing, okay? Mm-hmm. But I can explain it in a way that the managers understand it. And if I can't, then I have no business being there, and I won't go because that means I don't understand it. And so when I translate that into my writing, I try to take in my books, my nonfiction books first, and I'll talk about the science fiction. For instance, in A Traveler's Guide, I tried to explain that as if I would explain it to somebody I went to high school with that never went to college maybe and has a vocational degree, which great smart people do that. It's wonderful stuff, but they may not be familiar with some of the terms I have, but they have good common sense and know how things work. And I want to explain it to people so that the average person in their everyday experience can say, oh, okay, I kind of get that, right? Because a lot of this stuff really isn't that hard. It's just scientists and engineers have a hard time explaining it to people that don't have the same vocabulary. And I try to run that in my science fiction also, because I want to tell an entertaining story, but I want the science to be believable in the background. And to do that, I got to keep it simple. And yeah, I have MacGuffins. Yeah, I make up engineering, but you'll see that I don't violate the laws of physics, Captain, whatever. I don't do that, right? But I try to make it so that it's not in your face. Try to avoid page-and-a-half data dumps where you get all this technobabble. I don't want to do that. But I want people to go along for the ride and kind of have an intuitive idea of what's going on with the science in the background. It's what I try to do.
See, because I think this has been one of my, and this isn't going to surprise anyone. I'm of kind of like I'll call it the big three: science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Mm-hmm. Right? Of those, science fiction is the third on my preference list. And I think that, and obviously there are exceptions. I mean, obviously we've talked about Chris Rocchio and of course, Frank Herbert and stuff like that. I love all that stuff. I love The Expanse. I haven't been shy about talking about that. And Alistair Reynolds, I love Alistair Reynolds. His stuff is freaking awesome. But a lot of times, I've picked up some other stuff. I picked up, who was it? I think it was Peter Hamilton. I picked up some of these things and I started reading them and I just stopped caring.
You got bogged down?
Super bogged down because the science was so up there. And like you said, there were pages of techno speak and I'm like, I don't know. I don't freaking know. Like, I don't know what's happening anymore. Like, where's the character?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what's happening anymore. I'm dumb.
Well, I think for me, that would not be an enjoyable read for me in all likelihood. Although I've probably read some of these. I reread some of Charles Sheffield's books, and they're pretty heavy in the technical if you've ever read his stuff. And I'm okay with it because I understand a lot of it. But I can see how that'd be very off-putting for just somebody to pick up and say, I want to be entertained by this, right? And so I try to avoid that. And Travis Taylor and I are doing another series. We've got the second book of the series coming out in November from Baen. It's called Crisis at Proxima. Mm-hmm. Started with Saving Proxima. And our writing of that's a first contact story. But again, we wanted to write it so that the element of what happens to the people in a first contact scenario is first and foremost. But we had to come up with a plausible technical first contact scenario to underpin that, right? And so we did it with radio, as people would, but we did it with fax machines and intercepted broadcast of fax machine data, essentially. So kind of approximately. So we're just trying to put the science in there so that you get it and you understand how they received it, but it's not the core of the story.
You're not explaining the circuit boards.
No. The core of the story is how the people react to that and what happens with the politics and how they get things together to go respond to that. And of course, there's a crisis. It wouldn't be called Crisis and Saving, in the series if there weren't some problem to solve. And it is a technical problem. It's a medical problem. But again, we don't go into the genomic sequence and all that kind of thing. So we try to keep it at that level. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, look, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. I'm having a great time. We're all having a great time. This is awesome. We'll be right back.
When the lights went out, humanity died. But from darkness came hope. The surviving students at St. Dominic's Preparatory School for Girls have had it rough since the H7D3 virus virtually wiped out human civilization. Between rampaging hordes of zombies and wannabe tin-pot dictators, the only thing holding them together is the iron will of the school's lone surviving nun, Sister Anne. They know how to survive, but rebuilding isn't only about surviving. It's about rising up. The flames of life will be fanned, and the sparks from every strike of the hammer will provide light in the darkness. But it will not be easy. From atop the mountain of fire, this beacon of hope must spread, or humanity will die quietly in the long, final night. From best-selling author Jason Cordova comes Mountain of Fire, an all-new novel set in John Ringo's Black Tide Rising series. Coming in September 2024 from Baen Books. Order your copy today.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Okay, so the first half of the episode, you know, we were kind of talking about where you came from as far as your day job and stuff, and the frickin' rad stuff that you're working on. And then, of course, you know, some of the fictional stuff and how you're distilling what you know and how you're making it digestible for the readers. So I guess the easy question here is, how does your day job impact your writing, and how does your writing impact your day job?
Sure.
If it does.
It does. Oh my gosh. Well, I mentioned earlier that reading science fiction definitely impacted my day job because I picked my day job because of what I was reading.
That's why I write torture scenes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Mental note how to get out of the window in a hurry. I'll say this. Let me just give an example. When you're in a flight project for NASA, and I've been the principal investigator, which means the responsible person for putting a flight project together, there was one that I was leading called Near-Earth Asteroid Scout. It launched on the Artemis rocket launch back in November of 22 as a secondary payload. And we were early in the project. This was probably 2015, 2016. And you have these meetings that are called risk management meetings. Now, they have different meetings in different professions. Most fields do these. But what you have to do is, it's basically the fun part of an early project because you get all the engineers in the room and you list all the things that could go wrong. And then you try to figure out which of these can you mitigate with money, which can you mitigate with people, time, and which can't you do anything about and you just have to accept. And are the risks high and the consequences, and do all this stuff. So we were looking at the trajectory of our spacecraft, which was supposed to fly lift off on the rocket, get Earth escape, and then was to take a solar sail and fly by a small asteroid, okay, Near-Earth Asteroid Scout. We were going to scout out an asteroid, and the solar sail provides the propulsion. We had a scientist from JPL, had a camera that was going to study the asteroid, so we're working on this. And the people I consider to be the smartest people in the room are the trajectory people. These are the people that do the orbital mechanics and figure out how you do all your flying with these things. A lot of math. And we were doing the risk model, discussion of risk. What are all the risks? Things could break, things could fall off, whatever. And he raises his hand and he goes, there might be a problem with this asteroid. So we turn and we say, what's that? He said, well, I've been looking at its size. It's not very big, and its orbit. And we have to get the big radio telescopes to give us more data on its orbit precisely before we can plot the trajectory. But it could be something other than an asteroid. Well, what might it be? And he said, well, there's a small chance, about a 5% chance, this is one of the spent boosters from a Saturn V that went into orbit around the sun. And there's a chance that we'll do this whole mission with our camera, and we'll get there and we'll see USA written on the side of the booster, okay? 2.5 years of flight in deep space, going to study an asteroid. We have an asteroid scientist, and we get to an old rocket stage. So at that moment, though, I tuned out.
You're like, hold on, I can write this story.
This is a story. And so that night I came home and I jotted down what became the novel Mission to Metheny, which is one of my favorite of my solo novels, not collaborated. And Mission to Metheny begins with an asteroid mining company, and they have to survey lots of asteroids to figure out which ones they're going to go mine to supply the burgeoning interplanetary civilization that's growing. And they have a whole fleet of these out there, and they're surveying asteroids. So they get an alert from one of their asteroid survey vessels that went to this asteroid, and it's not an asteroid. It's an old spaceship, but it's not human. Okay? Nice. And so that led to my story, Mission to Metheny, which takes you, of course, to Metheny, which a lot of people don't know, which is a moon of Saturn. And it is a way cool moon of Saturn, in that it's one of the smallest moons in the solar system. It's shaped like an egg. It's covered with white frost, so it looks like an egg. And it's one of the least dense moons in the solar system. So, of course, it too is not really a moon. So, anyway, that's what led to that. But it all came out of a risk management meeting at work. Okay? That's where that whole novel came out of that one meeting. And it was great. It was great. Now, I don't know what was said in the rest of the meeting. I had to go read the minutes.
Didn't matter.
I
It
had
was
to go read the
fine.
minutes later on. But that's an example of how my day job influences my writing.
That's awesome.
That's rad.
Now, I have one I was going to bring up just because you've teased this story, but I have not heard this story about how you almost wound up in witness protection.
Well, yeah, you don't expect that of a NASA scientist, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just curious.
It's not typically a high-risk job.
Curious how this one shook out.
I mean, it does sound like the plot of like a bizarre thriller
I'll
novel.
say this episode of 24.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, in hindsight, it was really intriguing. At the time, it was not fun. I was there is a program that NASA has, and a lot of government agencies have it. It's called the Small Business Innovator Research Program, and it's reserved for small business and startups. And we had a company that a young engineer found startup company, wrote a great proposal to one of our solicitations. He was selected, independent peer review. We have scientists review it, did good work. And when the study came in, it was a low-funded study, but there's an option for a follow-on to build hardware, which is a lot higher dollar value, right? Like an extra zero after the number, right? And this first proposal was just awesome, above and beyond, far beyond the level of effort you would expect for a typical contract of that magnitude. Right. So it went through the peer review process and was selected. So the hardware was assigned, and the dollar value, like I say, order of magnitude more money. Well, a few months into it, I get a call from somebody working for this guy saying, Les, the money's not going where you think it's going.
Did he say, Houston, we have a problem? Did he say
No.
it? Did he say it?
No, he said, Les, you've got a problem.
Dang it.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is a call I don't want to have to make, but I have to make. I had to call the NASA Inspector General, right? And so I asked this person if it was okay to have the IG call him, and he said, yeah. So I called the Inspector General. Like I say, it's not a call anybody wants to have to make. And I had the conversation. They started an investigation that involved getting the district attorney of the district where this company is located. Turns out that this person had bought an airplane,
Oh, okay. Cool.
had bought a boat, and was not making technical progress for that first progress report. And when they started looking into it, this person got blinded by the dollars.
Yeah.
Okay. And as accountant background, you've seen that, I'm sure.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
fraud out there, and I don't know how this guy thought he's going to get away with it, but he did.
They don't think at the time.
They don't. Well, he wasn't
They don't-
thinking. It was like, hello.
Yeah,
So
they don't think too hard on that.
So the next thing I know, I'm having a couple of times a week conversations with the district attorney, okay, as they're putting everything together. So they arrest the guy. A trial date is scheduled, and they inform me that all the witnesses, even if and he called me a good guy, you're one of the good guys, you're going to be testifying on the behalf of the prosecution, we'll fly you up here, you have to be subpoenaed. And the local sheriff will come to your door and give you a subpoena. Don't panic. You're being subpoenaed by the prosecution to be a prosecution witness. And I said, all right. So I told my wife, we had little kids at the time, this is going to happen. So I'm home one evening, a couple of days later, and the doorbell rings. And I go to the door. And I'm standing at the door is not the sheriff. It's a U.S. Marshal. I thought, well, that's interesting. And he goes, I'm here to subpoena you for blah, blah, blah. So I look at the envelope, and the envelope has the seal of the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program on it. And I said, excuse me, why is this on here? And he says, well, that's why I'm here instead of the sheriff. This is because you might end up being in the Federal Witness Protection Program. My heart stopped. Multiple four-letter words started flowing through my head.
We have an episode on that.
I went in to talk to my wife, explain to her. My sister is an attorney, okay, who was chief counsel at Oak Ridge National Laboratories. I'm a family of underachievers here. And so I call my sister, and she basically says, you're SOL, brother. You're stuck. You've been subpoenaed. So I call the next day, the DA, and I say, why didn't you tell me that this was happening? He goes, well, we probably should have done that, but this guy's got some connections in Brooklyn that are troubling. Okay? So my vision of being a science fiction writer, of flying things in space through NASA, which has been my dream ever since I can remember, were just evaporating. I was going to end up being like a USDA meat inspector in Des Moines, okay, under an assumed name. And I'm thinking, this is awful. This is horrible. I was just in this total disaster mindset. And then a few days later, I get a call from the DA. You don't have to fly up and testify. The guy took a plea bargain.
He pled out.
He pled out. So I have kept that envelope with the Federal Witness Protection Program on it in my keepsake shelf. And that was my flirt with almost having to go into witness protection.
Oh my gosh, that's rad.
I'm just sorry. I'm just sitting here. I'm just thinking through the story ramifications of this.
It was not pleasant. Yeah.
All of a sudden,
this is almost a John Grisham thriller.
we start getting novels from Jess Lawson, the USDA meat inspector in Des Moines.
Nothing against meat inspectors or Des Moines, but it's not what I wanted to do with the rest of my career.
You could give you good barbecue advice.
Shocking lack of spaceships there.
Shocking.
1 star.
But there have been a lot of weird things that happened in my career, but that was the most, jaw-dropping, heart-stopping.
Well, you don't want to hear is like, oh, he's, connected to guys in Brooklyn, and all of a sudden, like, Tony Soprano is going to come to your house.
Well, that's what I was envisioning, is like, oh my God.
It's going to be some dude who looked like me when I'm,
Looks like James Gandolfini.
Yeah.
Named Guido.
Basically, guys, I look like the support. Well, I'm too beardly right now, but I look like I spent my whole life looking like the supporting cast of any given mafia movie. So that's just how I roll. I was going to ask you, Les.
Yes, sir.
Nuts and bolt advice for writing hard sci-fi for our listeners who are out there trying their hand at this stuff, like the stuff that you have learned. What would you like to pass on?
Wow. Okay, this is the sage moment, right? Is that what that is? Well, I'm still learning as I go. Even though I've written several books, you never. I have not. I mean, it's not my full-time job. I do it in the part-time, and most writers are that way, right? You can't afford to live on what you earn because it's the 1% of the 1% who can do that, really. And so my advice is, first thing, you got to write. The more you write, the better you get. And the second thing is, don't beat yourself up if you don't have a routine. I hear a lot of writers say, oh, I've got to have a routine. I've got to have these hours. That's great if it works for you, right? My job is a very demanding job. I travel a lot. Sometimes I have to go in early for meetings. So I write when I can. So I find myself writing on weekends, in the mornings before I go to work. If I wake up early, I write on an airplane. I write on business trips in hotel rooms. I do not have a routine. And one of the things that I hear a lot of writers tell people in writers' tracks at conferences and things is establish a routine. It's not always possible to do that. Don't let that keep you from writing. The other advice I would give, and for me, it may just be me, but I don't think it is, don't try to do it unless you have a block of time of at least 2 to 3 hours of quiet to do it. Because I get in flow. And any interruption to flow, whether it be a family member coming in, the dog needing to go out, anything, it takes too long to recover.
Yeah.
And get back in flow. And so I try to do catch as catch can as I travel, but like in the hotel room, if I'm out to dinner with colleagues till 8 o'clock, I don't try to write that night. If I'm back in the hotel early and I've got 3 hours, I'm going to do this. Because it's too frustrating for me to only get 500-600 words in and then you're done, right? But if that's all you can do and they're good 500 words, do it. But for me, I like to have a little bit more of a block of time. Now, on the hard science side of it, write what you know, if you know. And if you don't know, there are people out there that would love to help you. What I have found in areas of science that I'm not an expert in, I ask people, and they love helping you because they love helping writers. And I've consulted with other writers. I've had other writers, hey, Les, can you help me with this? And I don't know how to answer their question. So I refer it to some of my colleagues, and they basically love it. Okay? Now, I don't think they want to do it all the time and become on the short list of consultants for every writer that's out there. But if you're writing a novel about a medical issue in space or whatever, I would suspect there are some MDs or some professors at a medical school that if you just cold emailed them and explained what you're doing and who you are, they would probably help you out. Okay?
I've used Rob Hampson, who's a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Rob, to help me with brain stuff for a sci-fi thing that I did.
And he probably loved doing
Loved
it, right?
Yeah,
He loves talking about that.
Well, and then I named the device, like, that downloaded memories into people's damaged brains. I named it a Hampson device in honor of Rob. I get that a lot with guns. Writers will ask me gun questions. I'm the go-to guy for gun stuff. That's good stuff. I
think that's good. That's good advice. I've seen a lot, and I've seen this question pop up in the WriterDojo Facebook group that we have, and I've seen this at conventions. I've seen tons of people ask this question. That's that, well, I'm not a scientist, therefore I'm not allowed to write. Science fiction, or hard science fiction. I'm like, well, if the requirement is you have to have X number of PhDs and you have to be a ginormous brained physicist, well, there's not that many of those people out in the world, and there's even less of those people in the world who do that, who also happen to be good authors. So just like anything, I mean, I'm not a cop, but I like to write detective stuff.
Well, David Weber's not a scientist.
Correct.
And David Weber is one of the more successful science fiction authors alive.
Yeah.
Tom Clancy wasn't a special operations soldier or any sort of CIA analyst. He was an insurance salesman. And so honestly, I don't think it applies really.
I don't think
so.
So
It's
either.
a fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just avoid scientific mistakes, because that will jar people out of your story. And I think this is a mistake I see when people send me their manuscripts unsolicited, which I don't encourage people to do.
I love that.
And I'll see things, and it's like, well, nature doesn't really work that way. And even if you're a good writer, if I'm reading your story, that's going to jar me out of the story.
Do you ever
right?
get really nitpicky, pedantic science people?
We do. Yeah, I do. And I get those emails. Most emails are not that way.
Right.
Some emails are, and I think part of this is legitimate criticism. Sometimes in order to explain a physical phenomenon so that your non-technical person can understand it, you have to generalize, and sometimes you generalize too much. And there are little exceptions or the outliers that violate that rule. But the problem is, in a story, you can't do that because it comes in textbook, right? And so sometimes it's not that what you write isn't correct. It's correct 98% of the time. And there are a few instances where there's exceptions, right?
Well, and the way I see it is, if there are two people out there that send me the email that say, well, your science is wrong, or, your thingamajig is wrong because you forgot to carry the seventh power of the, I don't know, whatever, some math term. I don't do math, to something. It's like, okay, sure. But there's 1,000 other people that didn't notice that and like the story now. Their money wins.
Well, and in all fairness, in all likelihood, if you're actually out in space doing some experiment or trying to do something, but that 0.1% of the time, it would go the way that you probably wrote it if you took some care to try to make sure you were trying to be accurate. But you have to generalize, and it's impossible to cover every possible exception to the rule for a lot of the things that are in science.
I'm curious, for you, as a guy who does write some of this hard science fiction stuff, how are you integrating your characters in with the knowledge that you have, and without making them seem like they are, well, to an earlier episode that I think that just went live the other day, more like a Mary Sue? How are you able to illustrate kind of the technical skills and the knowledge that your characters have when it comes to the sciencey stuff?
Well, first off, I try to avoid the Mary Sue. Because I'll just be candid, in most science endeavors today, space in particular, everything is a team effort. You cannot be an expert in everything. It's just impossible. There is, early science fiction, God bless them. I loved some of those characters because they were the scientists, so they knew everything, right?
I love that.
You know, and that was how it was in the 30s and 40s and 50s and kind of thing. And
that trope where the professor knows literally every science topic.
Right, right. And in reality, just isn't that way.
And all like broadcast TV.
Well, like, because biologists don't necessarily understand orbital physics and,
In the 40s, they did later.
Yeah. They did, and they're professor from Gilligan's Island, right? You know, knows a little bit about everything. And so what I do to cover that in the stories is it is inherently a team effort. It is inherently. And so your protagonist may know something in his or her field, and great, that gets the story going. But then they encounter something that they have to solve, and they go, oh, I don't know. And they go seek out people who do, right? Or some other event or character comes into the story with the solution or a potential solution. So I don't have characters who are that Mary Sue or the 1940s or 50s,
where everybody just knows science.
Right.
It's one big umbrella term.
And I like for them to be a little bit humble, too, because part of the beauty of science fiction is uncovering the mystery, right? And so you've got to paint it so that the mystery surprises not only the protagonist, but the reader. And oftentimes that means the protagonist has no idea. So I don't want them to be know-it-alls at all. I want them maybe to be smart in their area, but nothing we do, everything that is big science today is a team.
Well, and that's good too, because it's always nice to have, and we talk about this in terms of action, of writing action, to where you have a very competent individual, who's out there, guns blazing, who understands how to quick reload a shotgun or whatever, right? But when they're up against an elder god, it's kind of irrelevant, right? Like
I've read that in his book.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I was going to say that's getting into my area of expertise. Yeah.
Right, but the concept is the same, right? You're writing individuals, or you have written individuals and will write individuals who, they're an expert in a specific field, right? Part of a team or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that expertise does not necessarily translate to when, XYZ catastrophe happens, because they're like, well, crap.
And they're not all scientists either. Not all my characters are that way. I mean, I have had a few characters that are that way, but others are just, whatever vocation fits for how I want the story to play out. And they interact with the science, and the science is in the background, right? Even in hard science, the protagonist may not have any technical background.
That's one of those things that people really intend to enjoy in the sci-fi genre, is the competence of characters and different characters of different backgrounds, just succeeding through competence. Like, I'm really smart, or I can figure stuff out in this one thing. I mean, like, The Martian was wildly successful.
Mm-hmm.
What really was The Martian about is, like, one dude competently figuring out problem after problem after problem.
Even if it wasn't his area, he'd reason his way through it. And that's how we all think we would like to behave in an emergency, right?
Yeah, because wasn't he like was he an agronomist or something, And it's like trying to figure all this stuff out. I was like, how am I going to make air?
Minor detail to survive.
Yeah. It was great though. And but yeah, there is that angle of the intelligent, competent characters figuring problems out. I think is a huge draw for the genre.
Well, and there's one little thing. There's one thing that you said that I think is hyper important for people to realize, and that's that if you want to write hard science fiction, your characters do not have to be scientists.
No, not at all. Not at all.
It can be an accountant in space.
Actually, that's a good
whatever.
That's a valid point, especially for we talk about the writers who are scared to get into it because they aren't physicists or whatever the book is about. A trick that I have used in many short stories and also a little bit when I did some sci-fi is I'll have a sci-fi setting, but I'll write it from the grunt's perspective. I drive a car. I couldn't tell you I mean, I understand the fundamentals of how an internal combustion engine works, but I couldn't break down every part and tell you how it works. I'm not that competent on engines, but I can drive a car. And so I can have a guy drive a spaceship. I can have a guy drive a giant robot.
and when it breaks down, they have to figure out, what do I do to get this thing fixed, right? Yeah. Or how do I get help to get out of this?
Yeah, but he doesn't have to necessarily know everything.
Right.
And
yeah.
That's definitely a workaround.
I love going back and reading some of these old science fiction stories, but I can't do a lot of it. because that trope was very strong
Yeah.
in that time period.
Oh, I love Heinlein. But Heinlein was very, very huge on that, where you had, the whole specialization is for insects quote. A man should be able to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and all his protagonists were very much that manly man of action who could do literally everything.
Well, but I do have to throw in, and a lot of people are surprised at this. I'm a physicist. I have a graduate degree in physics. My undergraduate was a BA. I mean, I took all of the liberal arts stuff because I loved it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be that well-rounded person. And I had parents who encouraged that, which I'm very blessed to have.
Well, like you've written books with Travis Taylor.
I have.
If you describe Travis Taylor accurately, he doesn't sound like a real person. He sounds like a made-up character.
Yeah, because he's got multiple degrees, does fantastic things, very athletic. I mean, he doesn't sound like a real human being.
He's a CrossFit competitor, athlete, martial artist.
With 2 PhDs and 3 master's degrees.
Yeah, he reads almost
He's
like...
a Mary Sue.
He's a Heinlein
He's a living
character.
Mary Sue.
He's worse than a Heinlein character. He is a Clive Cussler character. And I say that with love. He's a great guy, but
Travis and I have been friends for a long time and have written several books together with
he's
Travis.
a good dude.
Oh, yeah.
He's really, really good at a very wide...
In other words, we're all jealous of Travis, but okay.
The way Tony Weisskopf put it one time is she had a calendar and it was like 12 months. And it was like the sexy authors of Baen. It'd be 12 months of Travis Taylor. The rest of us would
no Les Johnson and Larry Correia on that
there's
list.
no Larry Correia is August, right? No, it's 12 months of Travis doing CrossFit.
One of my favorite novels by Alistair Reynolds, who
Yeah, I've read some Alice.
and that dude's a smart guy too.
Yeah.
He has those
smart.
degrees and all that crap. Smart guy. But one of my favorite novels of his, it was originally titled The Prefect. It's been since changed to some lame title like Aurora Rising or something dumb. And if you say it too fast, Aurora Rising, like the words start to blur together and smudge together. It's like on 30 Rock, they had the made up show that one of the girls is always trying to come up with, the Rural Juror. That's how it sounds. Anyway, point is, the lead of that book is basically an interstellar kind of sort of corporate detective. He's not a scientist. But the science, as you put it, the science is there. The tech is there. The big brain stuff is all there. And he's interacting with it. And I think that's something that a lot of writers, both young and experienced, can learn is it's that, hey, look, if you want to write this heavy, this big brained, heavy science fiction stuff, go for it. And it's totally okay if your character is not the smart dude. He can be interacting with it. You know what I mean?
But when I read science fiction, when I've read science fiction, when I write my science fiction, I love sense of wonder. And I try to, I wish I could take what I sense and feel on a starry, clear night with clear air, dry skies, and the universe out there around me. I would love to take that and put it into a novel so that people can get that sense of wonder from the novel. And that's what I try to do. I have to let the readers tell me whether I'm successful at that or not. But that was when I started writing for Baen. That's what both Tonys, there was Tony Daniel at the time, said, Les, you're the sense of wonder guy. And because that's what has motivated me, it speaks to me, and I think there are a lot of people out there that would resonate with that, and that's what I try to do. And so the characters who are not scientists can experience that sense of wonder, right? But the science and the background is what provides that, right? And they just have to interact with that.
Well, I can't really think of a better way to end the episode. So with that, guys, Les, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, this was fun.
We appreciate it, man. Glad to have you on the show. And all you listeners out there, hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. This is the Writer Dojo. We'll see you on the next one.
Writer Dojo is Steve Diamond and Larry Correia. Produced by Jack Wilder and Bear and Hare Studios. Theme song, Word Mercenaries by Craig Nybo. New episodes come out every Wednesday wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/WriterDojo, by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on the Writer Dojo, email ads@writerdojo.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to questions@writerdojo.com.
I don't know what's happening anymore. I'm dumb.